Left, Right and Centre. I'm Vishnu Shom. On the programme tonight, a day after the Supreme Court upheld 10% reservation to economically weaker sections in admissions and in government jobs, there are key questions which are being asked on how this may impact millions of students in the country. Will this mean that general category students looking for admission in a university will find it tougher to get a seat since there are already reservations across several categories? What about private universities which have so far been kept out of the quota system? Can there now be reservations for EWS students? That's a big question. This on a day when there has been condemnation of the order from the DMK in Tamil Nadu, who want to challenge the ruling. Their point: the quota system is against social justice and equality and contrary to the social justice policy of India. On the show tonight, quota versus merit. Should the poor get reservation in private institutes? We'll also be reflecting on some of the other arguments which have emerged. We've got a fantastic panel this evening. Shadhan Farasat, who's been a petitioner in this case, joins us. Aman Lekhi, senior advocate in the Supreme Court. Professor Geeta Bhatt, who's an educator herself, affiliated with Delhi University. A. Sarvanan of the DMK. Tanushri Rai is a second-year student at Lloyd Law College. And Professor Vikram Singh is the Chancellor of Noida International University. Thank you all very much for being with us. Professor Singh, let me come to you first, because it is important what one of the judges in the Supreme Court judgment actually had to say. Justice Dinesh Maheshwari said, and I quote, "Unaided private institutions cannot be seen as standing out of the national mainstream. Reservation in private institutions is not per se violative of the basic structure. Thus, reservations as a concept cannot be ruled out in private institutions." As the Chancellor of Noida International University, is this something that concerns or worries you?
It doesn't worry me at all. Words of profound wisdom from the Honorable Judge, and it is in conformity with the sentiment of the people and the Constitution of India. What the Honorable Judge has said in a very unstructured and amorphous form has been taken up as a vibrant, proactive, affirmative action by almost all the private institutions, my university included. And to look the other way perhaps would be quoting the recipe of disaster. Therefore, I think it was the call of the time that have a structured affirmative action and incorporate the weaker sections of society, which we were doing till now in an unstructured manner, now in a very structured manner. It is a win-win situation for everyone.
Professor Singh, how is that actually going to work in your university? Are you just going to, for example, add extra seats? Because as far as government institutions are concerned, that is the solution being offered.
There are two things that I would tell you. There are seats that we cannot have on our discretion. There are medical seats.
Right.
They are not in our discretion. But there are seats that are engineering, law, management, education, and other such courses where we have the discretion to increase the number of seats, scale down the fees, have the GDPAs structured and customized for weaker sections, scale down the fees also, and also the corporate social responsibility, and also the discretion vest that I am the Chancellor of the university to also ensure that no student is debarred for higher education, quality education, merely because that student happens to be from the weaker sections of society.
Socio-economically weaker. All right, we'll come back to it in a moment, sir. Shadhan, explain this to me. The government has set, and correct me if I'm wrong, a limit of 8 lakh rupees as an income limit for EWS reservation. But according to the government's own data, 95% of Indian households earn less than 8 lakh rupees. Now, if that is the case, the number of people in India who are eligible to get EWS reservation quotas in colleges, etc., government jobs, is huge. How do we accommodate potentially so many?
No, that is correct. I think the 8 lakh limit is actually quite arbitrary. It's quite high because no way if you are earning, up to 8 lakh, you are economically weak.
Right.
In fact, 8 lakh is the OBC creamy layer. So
yes.
Also the limit. So you identify the creamy layer under one section of reservation using 8 lakh. And the same financial limit is being used to identify economically weaker section amongst the forward caste.
Right.
So that does not really make any sense. But that issue really, whether 8 lakh is arbitrary or not, is pending before another bench of the Supreme Court. And that this bench yesterday, the verdict which came out was not concerned with that because that was not under the constitution. That's a separate executive notification. But I think there is clearly some problem there because, as you rightly pointed out, almost not even 98 to 99% of India's population will effectively be entitled to reservation. Right. Although in that percent, since backward classes are excluded, you will have all the backward classes not eligible for it. But amongst the forward caste, effectively 97 to 98% will be effectively entitled.
And if you keep aside even caste for the moment, since the number is huge, I mean, essentially anybody in India because people fall under that economic category, that income category, would be eligible. So I mean, it's just one massive, humongous category.
Yeah.
What
really
does that achieve?
Yeah, so that's the thing. It really, I think the whole EWS reservation, the way the first amendment and the actual rolling out of it, both the aspects, it really is a political signaling by the government. I really don't see how it's going to help anybody who earlier did not really have access. Because when you're going to set these kind of limits, I could have understood if you set a limit of 2 lakhs, then within the forward caste, people who were genuinely poor, who were actually poorer, and who didn't have access to proper education, etc., could have, because of their poverty, could have accessed this. But now, effectively, they are competing with the remaining, the entire bunch of the forward caste. So what they were earlier doing under the,
it's almost as if that economic criteria replaces caste considerations which exist, because everybody, relatively speaking, in those caste considerations, in the caste quotas, wouldn't meet that category from an economic standpoint. Most people in India would, as you mentioned. So it just seems bizarre.
Yeah, that is correct. So I think it's a political signaling thing. I don't think there are any real.
So we'll talk about the politics in half a second. Aman Lekhi, let me come to you. Do you see this as political signaling? Do you see this as being something which is opportunistic ahead of elections in the country? Or do you actually see this as being really uplifting? Because that number which Shadhan was talking about makes so many people eligible. Is this a true reservation?
I've always maintained, as the reservation is concerned, the manner which is practiced is essentially a political artifice. As far as the judgment is concerned, I feel, and I said it on earlier occasions too, the judgment is completely flawed. In fact, I have occasion to disagree with both the majority and minority because they concur that the basic structure is not violated. In my opinion, it is violated. The identity test is violated, but that is a different issue altogether. Dealing with the issue which you have raised, 2 things are important. One, the amendment is enabling. Now, in terms of the amendment, there is an office memorandum. You referred to the office memorandum when it mentioned the various criteria. You have correctly pointed out that as far as the criteria is concerned, the criteria is such as to make the entire exercise more or less a worthless one, because the sweep would be so wide as to make the trickle down of the benefits almost non-existent, because choosing amongst the different contenders will be almost an impossibility. And here a very important aspect has been missed also by the Supreme Court is, if there is an entitlement to provide a measure, the choice of the measure should be preceded by some kind of study, some data, some facts on which it can actually be concluded that what the government proposes to do is in fact a legitimate mode of exercise of authority. Why is that important? Because the entitlement is to equality. The right is guaranteed to an individual. This is an exception. It is called an application of the right, but the point is that to the extent a community or a section's interest is examined, the right of the individual is infringed.
Correct.
Now, if the right is to be infringed and for a cause which has to be substantial, the basis has to be known. Because until the basis is known, the very principle which is being applied would be more or less ambiguous and nebulous. And the method of enforcement, in fact, the basis of enforcement itself would be lacking.
Sure.
The problem with this entire exercise is that they have this imaginary figure, and we have got the attendant circumstances, a few square feet or square yards, and from where we get it, to what extent it will be relevant, and in how do you say that this will in fact impact entitlement or cause some kind of disability is completely unknown.
Yeah.
So even if the intention is right, the method of bringing it about is completely bereft of any sense or substance, as to make it wholly arbitrary.
Professor Geeta Bhatt, now I know that in government educational institutions, for example, and this is what the Solicitor General argued in the Supreme Court last year, they would actually introduce a very large number of extra seats. They told the Supreme Court that 2,13,766 additional seats will be added, and therefore the question arises, who's going to pay for this? And the government has actually sanctioned a very large amount of money, 4,315 crores, to allow for infrastructure to be built, to allow for more people to be placed in colleges. But do you believe that this is the solution, just adding seats? Where does one get quality teachers? Are we ensuring the same teaching standards? Do we physically have the space in all courses to actually add this sort of space? I mean, there are going to be so many more students coming in, potentially.
Well, Vishnuji, yes, definitely. There is, there is a more or less increase of nearly, if we say over and above, because the specific direction which has been given to the institution says that, the number of seats that is to be improved, has to be increased, is not going to infringe into the already allocated seats
so
for the other categories which are there.
Over and above.
Over and above that. And for that, an allocation of, as you just mentioned, has already been done by the government for nearly 153 or so central, educational institutions, including research institutions. Now, yes, expansion is required. And Vishnuji, if you remember that even when the OBC quota had come, at that time also the government, on the same lines, when there was an increase in the number of student seats, correspondingly, there was also, additional budget and additional, allotment of teaching positions which was given, which subsequently is going to happen in this also. However, I would also like to put forth one point is that the discussion, because of some technical reasons, I could not join earlier. We also need to look into consideration that these kind of, the kind of anomalies which are being discussed here, if you look at the, the Justice Rohini Commission, which along with the OBC Commission looked into that what is the percentage of the representation of the various subcategories of the OBC which are getting benefited by the government jobs and in educational institutions, that submission, which in 2017, that itself says that almost 983 sub-communities are there among OBC which have zero representation in jobs and in educational institutions. 97% of the
so you believe that there needs to be further quotas?
Given by 25%. So
are you calling for more quotas?
Statistics which exist for... Sorry, I didn't get you.
Are you calling for more quotas, therefore, to ensure even more representation?
No, what I'm saying is, therefore, maybe in the coming times, we also need to look into the fact that how when we are using the word backward, maybe we also, today in 21st century, we also need to look into it that how we are defining this. That also has been raised by one of the judges in this verdict.
That's important. How does one actually define it? Because all of a sudden, we are now defining it after this judgment over and above caste considerations on socio-economic grounds, primarily economic grounds. So is this a better way of actually measuring those who need the support that the system has failed? But Mr. Saravanan, let me come to you next. Your party has been vociferously against what has taken place because you believe that additional quotas actually go against the principle of social justice. And I would suggest that, you have a very strong point, because the idea of giving reservations several decades back was to ensure social upliftment for millions in our country. The fact that 75 plus years later, we are still doing it seems to suggest that the entire system of giving quotas has failed, because today we are giving more quotas. We aren't reducing them.
You have right on certain aspects, Vishnu. See, the quota system or the basis of reservation has come in because people were denied access to education, access to jobs and all other things based on their caste and community. So how do you identify them to give some benefits to them? That is only based on this caste and communities. That is why the reservation should be based only on social, cultural and educational background.
Okay.
But this system of economically trying to put someone, see, reservation is not a poverty alleviation program. Somebody is poor, give them doles, pay their fees, give them scholarship. But giving them representation, reservation is not the right thing. This is a political move.
No, but why is it not the right thing? Why is it not?
Yes, it is not the right thing, Vishnu, because earlier, thousands of years ago, people were denied education, people were denied jobs not because of their poverty or richness. They were denied education and other things based on their caste. So caste and those backwardness should be the primary criteria for determining reservation, not the economic criteria. Economic criteria is fungible. You are a millionaire today, you may become a pauper tomorrow. You are a pauper today, you may become a millionaire tomorrow. So how would that economic criteria be a valid thing? Mr. Raman Lekhi was right. We are very disappointed with this judgment. Our leader, Mr. M.K. Stalin, has said that this is set back our century-old program of social justice. This apart, the other, this 8 lakh criteria is a big joke. Because why the BJP?
No, hold your thought. You have a point. Geeta ji, do you want to respond to Mr. Saravanan? I'll come back to you. I promise you. But he has a real point. What if somebody becomes impoverished, right? You are therefore eligible for the quota, and vice versa. The background of the individual is never taken into account. It just depends on how wealthy they are at a particular time.
Vishnuji, but we also need to keep this thing in mind that this reservation, the EWS reservation, is once it has been taken by an individual, after that he or she is not eligible for this quota in further, which is in contradiction to the kind of reservation that is being given to those who have been economically or socially backward, like SC, ST and OBC. And in spite of the fact that there are many subcategories who actually at present are doing very well in terms of whether socially or economically status, but they are still availing this reservation policy. So there is a difference between the two. It is not, you can't correlate the two. It is not the same reservation which is being given to the to the other conventionally which have been given to the other communities.
Okay, Mr. Saravanan, you disagree? Go ahead.
Yes. Yeah, Vishnu, you were also making another point. 75 years of reservation. What have we got to see? That is the argument. This is the point which will buttress the argument that reservation should continue. Take any niche jobs: Supreme Court judge, High Court judge, scientists, professors, secretaries. All these jobs, there is not adequate representation of SC, ST and OBCs. Even after 75 years of reservation. If this is what is happening, then this reservation should continue. I will take this classic example of our former president, Mr. Ramnath Govind. What happened to him at the Puri Jagannath temple? He is rich. He was the first citizen of this country. But what made them misbehave with him? It is his community. We are in this century. We are talking about that. So you may be rich, but that is not what that will determine how you will be viewed by the society. This society is not equal.
Community-based reservations is the way to go, as it has for so long, and not economic reservations. That's your point, right?
Yes.
Shraddhan, do you agree with that?
Reservations, if we look at the world around, most countries don't have reservations, right? I mean, most countries follow other forms of affirmative action, which are less aggressive. The reason why we have something like reservations is in a very peculiar historical context of a caste system which oppressed people, and that's why you went out of the way and did that, and that's why the whole idea of reservations was brought in by Dr. Ambedkar. Therefore, the Indian context of reservations and quota is very much a social justice context. It is not an economic context. Now, that was argued before the Supreme Court. Of course, the majority has not accepted. In fact, even the judges who are otherwise dissenting have said, no, on economic criteria, you can give. But the other aspect which was on which the judges disagreed is that even if you give on economic criteria, which is, let's say, on poverty, but then how are you excluding the ones who have been discriminated historically and in fact, and that's the dissent says that, are poorer than the forward caste poor.
Right.
So really speaking, the poorest, you are giving it on a ground of poverty. But even if you just look on the metric of poverty, the poorest have been left out.
Right.
And that's why it was found by the two judges to be violative of basic structure.
We've got a student as well on this program, Tanushree Rai. She's studying at Lloyd Law College. Do you believe that, Tanushree, that this is a fair system, that students should get admission on the basis of their economic status over and above the quotas which already exist in private institutions? We haven't seen these quotas. Do you believe it should be introduced there as well?
Greetings to everyone in this panel. So my thing is that merit should always prevail over quota, irrespective of whatever be the situation. But in an exception, quota should be the economic and deprived sections of the people to bring them up. But quota should be rechecked, revised, and ultimately abolished in future when society and authority representing people may decide. Because being a student, I have given many government exams, but didn't clear it because I am a general category, or someone is from OBC, SC, and ST. He's not giving his best. His or her is not giving best, and they are getting the seats because there are less seats and the students are very large number. So I think merit should be there, but the quota system should be abolished in future. And the EWS category, of course, there should be a proper category for the general people also, because the general people who are very poor in the conditions, who they wanted to educate themselves. But then also the private universities having a very large amount of fees which we have to pay.
Right.
Of course, for the government for the government institutions, there's a less number of seats. We have to fight for that seat, giving exams and bring a large number of marks. Then also we are not getting the seats because there are reserved seats for SC,
No,
ST,
you raise a lot of
OBC.
important points, and I just want to start wrapping this up by going back to Aman Lekhi. I think this young student raises a lot of points. If there is a quota which is introduced, an EWS quota in private institutions, somebody has to pay for that. Those who are paying full fees will have to pay for somebody who gets in essentially free. Secondly, let's not forget about what quotas have done to general category students in government institutions. Where does merit come in? And the numbers are huge, and yet the seats seem to be so small. Isn't this all, something that we need to be thinking about as we debate this?
No, absolutely. You see, the problem is conceptual. The reliance on this amendment is on Article 46. Article 46 talk about sections. What Articles 15 and 16 talk about classes. They are absolutely distinct. You can't relate sections to classes, firstly. Secondly, in so far as the method of improvement are concerned, I don't know why we zero in on reservation every time. We zero in on reservation because it's politically expedient, and in that event, the grantor, the benefit gets immediate attention. Because the grantor gets immediate attention without there necessarily being a change on the ground. The fact that the benefit has been conceded gets applause, and therefore there is an enlargement of image, right. and the enlargement of image has got
enlargement of votes.
Political capital which follows out of it.
Right.
Now what?
Yeah, sure. Vishnu,
Yes,
can I answer the question?
Image leads to political capital. So that has been across. Secondly, thirdly, as far as the methods of improvement are concerned, see, if the economic criteria is concerned, the existence, consequence of economic criteria, even the section will not be identical. If why a person is poor, what the consequences of poverty, etc., will not be same across the section itself.
Right.
Because it will not be same across the section, the entitlement will not be uniform.
Right.
If the entitlement is not going to be uniform, to club them together will be violation of Article 14.
Right.
Now, in the guise of applying Article 14, you breach Article 14 because of the approach which is there, which is utterly senseless. Because the basis itself is lacking in any sound criteria. As a consequence, as far as the failure of the governance, insofar as improving the condition is concerned, gets sidetracked. Because the issue here is the inability to advance economically.
Right.
The inability to advance economically is a failure of governance. Now, failure of governance has to be addressed. Now, instead of addressing failure of governance with the failed governance system, you bring in a question of reservation.
Right. It's almost as if we assume that the system of governance has failed.
Absorb it.
It's almost as if we assume this, because the system
Vishnu,
of
can I
governance
answer
has
that
failed,
question?
we have to do this to enable people to get an education. It's hardly the cure.
Yeah. Vishnu,
But
can I
Mr.
answer that question?
you've got exactly 1 minute left. I promise you. Then I'm going to wrap up this program. Please go ahead.
This merit and reservation binary has been demolished nonetheless by the Supreme Court itself. Incidentally, that is the case filed by our party, seeking 27% of reservation for OBCs.
Are you going to challenge this, by the way? Are you going to challenge this?
This is something else. This is something else.
Yes
but
or
when
no?
we talk about reservation and merit, see, it is no secret, the Supreme Court has said it is no secret that having been born to forward classes, one is bestowed with certain privileges like access to quality schooling and coaching centers to prepare for a competitive examination, in addition to social networks and cultural capital like communication skills, accent, books or academic accomplishments.
Right.
This comes as a disadvantage to certain individuals belonging to a backward class. and they lag behind in open examinations. That is why the Supreme Court says reservation should continue. This is the difference. This is why merit and reservation, they are not binaries. They are not different.
All right. Tanushri, I'm
Yeah,
sorry,
I have
I'm out
one
of time. Yeah, do you want to
I
say
have
something
one
really
question.
quickly? Yes.
Yes, sir. Sir, I have a question. Why the society is not thinking about the education? They all are thinking about the reservation. Like, of course, the education is the most important thing where the like our national or nation will come forward, because we are the futures. No one is thinking about us. Everyone is thinking about the political parties, votes, but not the proper education, quality education, what we wanted. But we didn't
I
offer
think
that.
there's nobody on this panel who would disagree with you, not for a
Disagree
moment.
with you. Well spoken.
And I think it's a good way, it's a good thought to end this program on. Out of time on Left, Right and Centre. We'll take a short break.
Thank you.